"Another one for your collection, Sam?" asked Margaret, his assistant peering over his shoulder. Samuel lifted the photograph carefully by its edges. The sepia-toned image showed a schoolhouse in rural Texas, circa 1929, according to the faded pencil note on the back. About 30 children stood in 3 neat rows, dressed in their Sunday best, despite the visible dust coating their shoes. It was a common enough scene from any small town during the Depression era. "Just another historical submission," Samuel replied, but something about the photograph made him reach for his magnifying glass. He scanned the rows of solemn faces, farming children who had likely never smiled for a camera before, all except one. In the back row, slightly off-center, stood a girl of about 12. While her classmates stared stoically ahead, she wore a broad smile that seemed oddly modern, almost knowing. Samuel felt a chill when he focused the magnifying glass on her face. Her teeth looked wrong, too numerous, too sharp, like needles packed tightly in her mouth. "Jesus," he whispered, pulling back. "What is it?" Margaret leaned closer. Samuel blinked and looked again. The girl's smile now appeared perfectly normal. Straight teeth, nothing unusual. He rubbed his eyes. "Nothing. Just thought I saw something strange. Must be working too hard." That night, Samuel brought the photograph home to his apartment in downtown Dallas. After 20 years as a photography editor, he'd developed a hobby of collecting unusual historical photographs of Texas. This one would make an interesting addition, despite that momentary optical illusion. He placed it on his desk under the lamp and studied it again. The schoolhouse, the teacher standing stiffly at attention, the rows of children, and there she was, the smiling girl. This time, even without magnification, he noticed something else. While all the other children cast short shadows in the midday sun, the smiling girl cast no shadow at all. Samuel's phone rang, startling him. When he answered, only static crackled through the line, punctuated by what sounded like distant childish laughter. He hung up, attributing it to a bad connection. When he turned back to his desk, the photograph had fallen face down. He was certain he'd left it face up. As he reached to turn it over, he noticed writing had appeared on the back that hadn't been there before. Childish scrawl in what looked like red ink. "I see you looking at me." Samuel dropped the photograph as if burned. He told himself it was a prank, that someone at the office had written this, and he simply hadn't noticed it before. Still, he slept poorly that night, dreaming of teeth like needles and a child's laughter echoing through static. The photograph was exactly where he'd left it, but something had changed. He stared at it, blood running cold. The smiling girl had moved. In yesterday's image, she stood in the back row. Now she was in the middle row, 3 children closer to the center. And she was looking directly at the camera now, whereas before, she had been gazing slightly to the side. "This is impossible," Samuel muttered, hands trembling. He was a photography expert. He knew images didn't change. Someone must have switched the photograph while he slept. He flipped it over. The childish red scrawl remained, but now read, "1 row closer now." Samuel shoved the photograph into his briefcase and rushed to the office. He needed to speak with the newspaper's archivist, Harold Dunn, an elderly man who had documented Texas history for over 50 years. Harold examined the photograph with a professional eye, running his finger along the edges. "Authentic 1920s print paper and development technique," he confirmed. "Where did you say you got this?" "It was delivered to the office," Samuel replied, not mentioning the changing positions or the writing. "Do you recognize the school?" Harold squinted at the image. "Looks like Oakwood Elementary in Crier Creek. Small farming town that dried up in the Dust Bowl, mostly abandoned by 35. He peered closer. "Funny thing, though." "What?" Samuel asked too quickly. "This girl here, the smiling one, something about her face seems familiar." Harold reached for a filing cabinet and pulled out a folder labeled Crier Creek, 1925-1935. He extracted another photograph, this one of a different school in what appeared to be the same region. He placed it beside Samuel's photo. There, Harold pointed. Same girl, same smile. Samuel stared in disbelief. There she was, same dress, same unsettling smile, standing among a completely different group of children in a photograph dated 1927, 2 years before the one he possessed. Harold wasn't finished. He pulled out a third photograph, this one of a church gathering from 1931. And here again, some families moved around during those hard years, but... He trailed off. Samuel leaned closer. The girl appeared identical in all 3 photographs, down to the dress and hair ribbon. She hadn't aged a day across 4 years of photos. "Who is she?" Samuel asked. Harold shook his head. "No idea. Records from those small towns are spotty at best." He handed the photograph back to Samuel. Strange, though, local papers from Crier Creek reported several children went missing around that time. Families blamed it on people leaving during the Dust Bowl, but some stories suggested something else happened. Samuel felt a tightness in his chest. "What kind of stories?" "Just superstitious nonsense," Harold said, closing his file. "Tales about a girl who wasn't really a girl. They said if you looked too long at her smile, you'd see too many teeth." Over a cheap dinner at the motel's attached diner, he researched Crier Creek on his laptop. The town barely existed now. A few dilapidated buildings and a cemetery surrounded by empty farmland. According to local history websites, the town had suffered not just from the economic devastation of the Dust Bowl, but from a series of tragedies in the early 1930s. Details were vague, but mentioned several children who had disappeared without explanation. Sleep came fitfully. Around 3 a.m., Samuel jolted awake to the sound of his phone ringing. The caller ID showed his own home number. He answered cautiously. "Hello?" Scratchy static filled the line, then a young girl's voice emerged through the noise. "Why did you leave me alone, Mr. Wilkins?" Samuel hung up immediately, heart hammering. He tried telling himself it was a dream, a wrong number, anything but what it seemed. 10 minutes later, his phone chimed with a text message. It was a photo of his apartment, specifically his desk, where he'd first examined the photograph. The desk lamp was on, casting a glow over the empty surface, but the photograph wasn't there. A second message arrived. "I found you." Samuel packed his few belongings with shaking hands and checked out of the motel before dawn. He drove toward the office, desperate to confirm the photograph was still locked in his desk. The early morning streets were empty, fog hanging low over the roads. At a red light, he glanced in his rearview mirror and nearly crashed the car. A small figure in what looked like a 1920s dress stood in the middle of the road behind him. The light turned green, and Samuel floored the accelerator. The Chronicle building was dark when he arrived, but his keycard granted him access. The silence felt oppressive as he made his way to his office, floorboards creaking under each step. His desk drawer was still locked. Relief washed over him as he turned the key, but evaporated instantly when he saw the empty drawer. The photograph was gone. A noise from the archives room down the hall made him freeze. A filing cabinet opening, papers rustling. Someone or something was in Harold's office. Samuel approached slowly, phone in hand ready to call security. The archive door stood ajar, a sliver of light escaping into the hallway. He pushed it open. Harold sat at his desk, back to the door, hunched over something. "Harold," Samuel called softly. "What are you doing here so early?" The old archivist didn't respond. As Samuel drew closer, he noticed something dark and wet pooling on the floor around Harold's chair. "Harold," he repeated, voice breaking. When Harold finally turned, Samuel had to stifle a scream. The old man's eyes were gone, bloody sockets staring blindly. His mouth moved wordlessly, blood bubbling at the corners. In his trembling hands, he held the photograph. But the image had changed again. Now the smiling girl stood in the front row, her face larger, more defined. And behind her, where the teacher had once stood, was a tall, elongated shadow with too many limbs. Harold's voice emerged as a wet gurgle. "She wants you to see her, clearly now." As the sun rose, Samuel found himself on the highway heading west out of Dallas. He wasn't consciously planning a destination, but when he saw the exit sign for County Road 177, he knew where he was going. Crier Creek, the source. Maybe there he could find answers. The town, what remained of it, was 3 hours from Dallas. As Samuel drove deeper into rural Texas, the landscape grew increasingly desolate. Fields lay fallow. Farmhouses stood abandoned, their windows dark, empty sockets like Harold's eyes. His phone hadn't worked for the past hour, no service this far out. Part of him felt relieved to be disconnected. Another part felt terrifyingly alone. Crier Creek appeared suddenly, a cluster of buildings on the horizon, the morning sun casting long shadows across the cracked main street. Most structures were boarded up, reclaimed by weather and time. A faded sign welcomed visitors to a town that no longer existed in any meaningful way. Samuel parked outside what had once been a general store, its windows covered with decades-old plywood. The only sign of recent human presence was the small cemetery on the hill overlooking the town, its wrought-iron gate maintained and unrusted. As he stepped out of his car, the silence struck him immediately. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. The wind moved through the empty buildings, creating whispers that sounded almost like distant conversations. The schoolhouse from the photograph still stood at the end of the street, its red brick faded to the color of dried blood. The playground equipment, a single rusted swing set and a merry-go-round, sat motionless despite the breeze. Samuel approached slowly, feeling as though invisible eyes tracked his movement. The schoolhouse door hung partially open, swinging slightly on ancient hinges. Inside, dust motes danced in the shafts of light that penetrated the broken windows. The classroom was largely as it appeared in the photograph. Rows of wooden desks facing a teacher's larger desk at the front, a chalkboard still bearing faint, illegible writing. On the back wall hung a framed class photo. Samuel's breath caught. It was identical to the photograph he'd received, except for one detail: the smiling girl wasn't in it. A floorboard creaked behind him. Samuel spun around, heart pounding. "People don't usually come here anymore," said a weathered man in his 70s, standing in the doorway. "Not since the stories started." "What stories?" Samuel asked, trying to calm his racing pulse. The old man studied him. "You've seen her, haven't you? That's why you're here." Samuel nodded slowly. "My grandmother went to school here," the man said, stepping into the classroom. "Class of 29. She's in that photo there." He pointed to a solemn-faced little girl in the front row. "She told me about the other girl, the one who came one day and left with 6 children who were never seen again." "Who was she?" Samuel whispered. "Not who. What?" The old man's eyes were hard. "My grandmother said she appeared human, except when you looked closely at her smile. Too many teeth," she said, "like needles." Samuel felt lightheaded. "I have had a photograph. She was in it, but she moved. The image kept changing." The old man nodded grimly. "She chooses people, shows herself to them, plays with them first, like a cat with a mouse. What does she want? What they all want. To feed." The man glanced nervously at the windows, as if checking that the sun was still high. "My grandmother said she takes your eyes first, so you can't see her coming for the rest of you." Harold's empty eye sockets flashed in Samuel's memory. "How do I stop her?" "You don't. You can only hope she finds someone else more interesting." The old man backed toward the door. "I shouldn't be here." "Nobody should. They tore down most of the town to try to forget, but some things don't want to be forgotten." As the man turned to leave, Samuel noticed something that made his blood freeze. The man cast no shadow on the sunlit floor. "Wait," Samuel called. "Your grandmother. What was her name?" The old man smiled then, his mouth stretching impossibly wide, revealing row upon row of needle-like teeth. "I never said she was my grandmother, Mr. Wilkins." As he bent to retrieve them, a child's laughter echoed from inside the vehicle. Samuel peered through the window and recoiled in horror. Sitting in the passenger seat was the smiling girl, her dress pristine white against the worn upholstery. She waved at him with a small, pale hand. Samuel abandoned the car and ran toward the cemetery on the hill, the only place that seemed maintained, that suggested other people might visit. The wrought-iron gate screeched as he pushed through it, rusted despite its relatively well-kept appearance. Tombstones in various states of decay filled the small graveyard, some dating back to the town's founding in the 1890s. Samuel moved between them, glancing back to ensure he wasn't followed. The girl was nowhere to be seen, but that provided little comfort. In the newest section of the cemetery, Samuel found a row of small graves, all bearing the same death date, November 17th, 1929. 6 children, aged 7 to 12. Their headstones were simple, engraved only with names, dates, and the same epitaph: taken too soon. A larger stone stood behind the children's graves, more elaborate than the others. It read, Elizabeth Crane, 1860-1932. She tried to warn us. Beneath the inscription was a faded, almost illegible note etched in smaller letters. The smiling one walks with borrowed shadows. Samuel heard footsteps on the gravel path behind him. He turned to find an elderly woman approaching with a small bunch of wildflowers. Her face was deeply lined, her back bent with age, but her eyes were sharp and wary. "You shouldn't be here, stranger," she said, placing the flowers on Elizabeth Crane's grave. "Not with her awake again." "You know about her?" Samuel asked. "The girl from the photograph." The woman nodded gravely. "She comes back every few decades, always the same way. A photograph finds its way to someone. Then the disappearances start." She studied Samuel intently. "You've seen her smile up close, haven't you?" "Yes," Samuel admitted. "Who is she?" "Nobody knows for certain. Some say she was one of the first children in Crier Creek, back when settlers first came, that she wandered into something out in the wilderness, something old and hungry that wore her like a suit." The woman crossed herself. "Elizabeth Crane was the teacher in 1929. She realized what was happening after the third child disappeared, tried to warn the town." "What happened to her?" Samuel asked, glancing at the grave. "Official record says suicide. Threw herself from the church bell tower in 1932. The woman's voice lowered. "But my mother was there that day. Said Elizabeth was screaming about teeth as she fell. Said something was on her back, pushing her." Samuel shivered despite the afternoon heat. "How do I stop her?" The woman looked at him with pity. "Once she's chosen you, there's only one way out. You have to give her someone else." "What do you mean?" "The photograph. Pass it to someone new. If they look at her, really look at her smile, she'll follow them instead." The woman's eyes hardened. "That's how I'm still here. 60 years ago, she came for me. I gave the photograph to my neighbor's boy." Samuel felt sick. "I can't do that. I can't condemn someone else." The woman shrugged. "Then you better make peace with your God, because she'll take you piece by piece, eyes first, so you can't see her coming. Then your shadow, so no one can see you leaving." As she turned to go, Samuel called after her. "The photograph is gone. It disappeared from my office." The woman froze. "Then she's already taken too much of you. She doesn't need the photograph anymore." She hurried away, refusing to look back. Samuel stood alone among the graves as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the cemetery, all except his own. When he looked down, he realized with dawning horror that he no longer cast a shadow on the ground. His phone remained dead despite being fully charged, the screen occasionally flashing with static-filled images he couldn't quite make out. The radio cycled through stations automatically, snippets of music and talk shows, interrupted by bursts of white noise and what sounded like a child counting slowly. Night had fallen by the time he reached the city limits. Rather than returning to his apartment, Samuel drove straight to the Chronicle building. He needed to see if Harold was still there, if anyone had found him, if there was any evidence of what had happened beyond his increasingly fragile grip on reality. The parking garage was nearly empty this late, As Samuel pulled into a space, his headlights swept across the concrete wall in front of him, projecting his car's shadow, but not his own silhouette behind the wheel. The newsroom was dark and quiet, a few security lights casting pools of yellow illumination between long shadows. Samuel made his way to Harold's archive room, dreading what he might find. The door stood ajar just as he'd left it, but the room beyond was immaculate. No Harold, no blood, no photograph. The chair sat neatly pushed in at the desk, reference materials organized on the shelves. "Can I help you, sir?" Samuel jumped at the voice behind him. A security guard stood in the doorway, flashlight in hand. "I'm looking for Harold Dunn," Samuel explained, trying to keep his voice steady. "The archivist. He was here earlier today." The guard frowned. "Harold Dunn? We haven't had an archivist by that name. The position's been vacant since Mrs. Clemens retired last month." Samuel's mouth went dry. "That's impossible. I spoke with Harold this morning, right here in this room." "Sir, are you feeling all right? You look pale." The guard stepped closer, concern etched on his face. "Would you like me to call someone?" "No, I'm fine," Samuel said automatically. "Just a misunderstanding." Back at his desk, Samuel found everything exactly as it should be, except for a small manila envelope placed precisely in the center. His name was written on it in childish, uneven letters. With trembling fingers, he opened it and withdrew a single photograph. It showed his apartment building from across the street, taken from a low angle as if by a child. In his third-floor window, a figure could be seen looking out. Samuel himself, wearing the clothes he had on right now. He flipped the photograph over. On the back, in now familiar red writing, "I'm waiting at your home." Samuel slammed the photograph down. This had to end. He would go home, confront whatever was waiting, find a way to stop it. The elderly woman's solution, passing the photograph to someone else, was unthinkable. He couldn't condemn another person to this terror. As he turned to leave, something caught his eye. His reflection in the darkened office window looked wrong. He moved closer, heart pounding. In the glass, his eyes were empty black sockets. Samuel raised a hand to his face in panic, feeling his eyes still intact beneath his fingers. But his reflection showed a gaping void where his eyes should be, blood trailing down his cheeks like tears. Behind his eyeless reflection, a small figure in white stood smiling. By dawn, exhaustion had worn down his fear to a dull, persistent dread. He couldn't keep running. Whatever this entity was, it was already inside his mind, altering his perception. His only hope lay in understanding what it wanted and how to stop it. With the first light of morning, Samuel drove to the public library. If the smiling girl was some kind of local legend or historical anomaly, perhaps there would be records. Newspaper archives, folklore collections, historical accounts, anything that might explain what he was dealing with. The Dallas Historical Society occupied the library's third floor, its reading room empty save for an elderly librarian who barely looked up as Samuel entered. He requested access to archives related to rural Texas communities of the 1920s and 30s, particularly focusing on Crier Creek. Hours passed as he pored over microfiche newspaper records, county registries, and historical journals. He found mundane accounts of Crier Creek's founding, its brief prosperity, and eventual decline. The Dust Bowl had hit it particularly hard, accelerating an exodus already underway. Then he found it, a small article from November 18, 1929, in the Westfield County Herald. Tragedy strikes Crier Creek School. 6 children reported missing after school picture day. Search parties continue. A follow-up article a week later reported no success in locating the missing children. Authorities suspected they had wandered into the wilderness areas south of town and succumbed to exposure. The article mentioned the school's teacher, Elizabeth Crane, was inconsolable and requiring medical attention after claiming responsibility for bringing something wicked into the school. Samuel dug deeper, finding Elizabeth Crane's obituary from 1932, which delicately referenced her troubled final years, and persistent delusions following the tragedy. A separate article detailed her death, describing how witnesses saw her conversing with an unseen presence moments before her fall from the church tower. Most revealing was a small notation in the county mental health records. Elizabeth had been briefly institutionalized in 1931, diagnosed with acute delusional paranoia. Her doctor's notes contained a chilling observation. Patient fixates on photograph taken at school prior to tragedy. Claims one child in image, unidentified female, was not a student, but an entity she calls the Smiling One. A patient insists this entity consumed the missing children's shadows first, then their eyes, then the children themselves. Patient burns all photographs in her possession and scratches out her own eyes to stop seeing her coming. Samuel's hands shook as he copied down the information. The pattern was consistent with his own experience, the focus on the photograph, the eyes, the shadows. But nothing suggested how to end it. As Samuel gathered his notes, he noticed something odd about the reading room. When had all the other patrons arrived? The previously empty tables were now occupied by silently reading figures, their faces obscured by books or newspapers. None of them cast shadows in the afternoon light streaming through the windows. As if sensing his realization, every head in the room slowly turned toward him in perfect unison. Their faces were blank voids where features should be, except for wide, toothy smiles with far too many needle-like teeth. Samuel backed toward the exit. The elderly librarian looked up, her face the only normal one in the room. "Find what you were looking for, dear?" she asked. "I need to leave," Samuel managed, still retreating. "Before you go," she said, reaching below her desk, "someone left this for you." She held out a familiar manila envelope. "Who?" Samuel whispered. The librarian smiled then, her face stretching and changing. "She said you'd know." Samuel fled, the sound of childish laughter following him down the stairs. The manila envelope from the library lay unopened on the passenger seat. He didn't need to look inside to know what it contained. Another photograph, another message, another step in the entity's game. His research had revealed the pattern, but not the solution. Elizabeth Crane had destroyed photographs and blinded herself, yet still died. The woman in the cemetery had passed the photograph to someone else, condemning them instead. Neither option appealed to Samuel. There had to be another way. Samuel thought back to what the old man, or what had appeared to be an old man, in Crier Creek had said. She chooses people, shows herself to them, plays with them first, like a cat with a mouse. What if the key wasn't in resisting or running, but in refusing to play? With sudden resolve, Samuel grabbed the envelope and stepped out into the rain. Water soaked through his clothes as he made his way to his apartment building, each flash of lightning revealing empty streets, except for a small figure in white, standing motionless on the corner, watching him. Inside his apartment, everything was exactly as he'd left it, yet fundamentally wrong. The air felt too thick, the shadows too deep. In the bathroom mirror, his reflection still showed empty eye sockets, but he could see perfectly well. The contradiction made his head hurt. Samuel placed the unopened envelope on his desk and sat down. "I know you're here," he said to the empty room. "I know what you are, what you want." The lights flickered. In the momentary darkness, he felt something brush against his leg, too small to be an adult, too solid to be imagination. "You've been playing with me," Samuel continued, forcing his voice to remain steady, "moving in the photograph, taking my shadow, making me see things. It's all been a game to you." Childish laughter echoed from his bedroom. The temperature dropped suddenly, his breath fogging in the air. "But I'm not playing anymore." Samuel opened his desk drawer and removed a box of matches and a small metal trash can. He placed the unopened envelope inside the can. "You exist in the photographs. They're your doorway, your connection." He struck a match. "What happens if I close that door?" The laughter stopped abruptly. From the darkness of his bedroom doorway, Samuel saw movement. a small white shape emerging slowly. The smiling girl looked just as she had in the photograph. Pale dress, ribbon in her hair, unnaturally wide smile revealing too many needle-like teeth. Her eyes were black pits, similar to how Samuel's reflection appeared. "You can't stop me," she said, her voice a discordant mixture of childish sing-song and something ancient rasping. "I've taken too much of you already, your shadow, your eyes, even if you can still see with them." "Maybe," Samuel admitted, "but I can still choose not to play." He dropped the lit match into the trash can. The envelope caught fire immediately, flames illuminating the girl's face. Her smile faltered for the first time. As the photograph within the envelope blackened and curled, the girl took a halting step forward, then another. Her form seemed less substantial with each movement, the edges of her silhouette blurring. "This won't save you," she hissed, no longer sounding like a child at all. "Others have tried. I always come back, always find a new photograph, a new door." "Maybe," Samuel repeated, "but not through me." The fire consumed the envelope entirely, leaving only ashes. The girl stood inches from Samuel now, her smile impossibly wide, teeth like needles extending toward him. "I'll take your eyes first," she whispered, "so you can't see me coming for the rest." Samuel closed his eyes. "No, you want me to see. You need me to be afraid, to run, to play your game. That's your real food source, isn't it? Not our shadows or our eyes or even our bodies. Our fear." When he opened his eyes again, the girl stood frozen, her needle teeth inches from his face. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," Samuel lied, looking directly into the black pits of her eyes. "I'm not running. I'm not playing." For a long moment they stared at each other in silence. Then, with a sound like distant glass breaking, the girl's form began to fracture, hairline cracks spreading across her pale skin, like a porcelain doll dropped on concrete. "You'll see me again," she said, her voice distorting, "when you least expect it, when you finally feel safe. I'll be smiling from a crowd, from a family album, from a newspaper, and next time I'll take more than your shadow." "Maybe," Samuel said for the third time, "but not tonight." With a final ear-splitting shriek, the girl shattered into countless fragments that dissolved into the shadows of the room. The temperature rose instantly, the oppressive feeling lifting. In the bathroom mirror, Samuel's reflection showed his eyes intact, normal. On the floor by the window, his shadow had returned, moving as he moved. The storm outside had passed. Samuel stood in his quiet apartment, victory hollow in his chest. He knew the girl, whatever she was, had spoken the truth. This wasn't over. She would return, find another photograph, another door, another victim. But he had bought himself time, and now he knew what she truly fed upon. The experience had changed him. He'd removed all photographs from his apartment, sold his collection of historical Texas images, and even stopped taking pictures with his phone. His colleagues noticed his new aversion, but attributed it to stress or artistic burnout. Only Margaret, his assistant, seemed truly concerned. "You jump every time someone takes a picture in the office," she observed one afternoon, "and you literally ran away from that school group, touring the printing press when they wanted a photo with you." Samuel managed a weak smile. "Just going through a phase. Photography and I are taking a break." He hadn't told anyone about what had happened. Who would believe him? A girl from a 1929 photograph who consumed shadows and eyes. He'd be sent for psychiatric evaluation faster than he could say, "too many teeth." Instead, he channeled his experience into research, using his journalist credentials to access archives across Texas. He learned that Crier Creek wasn't the only town with stories of missing children and strange photographs. Similar incidents had occurred in small communities throughout the region, always following the same pattern. A mysterious photograph appears, children vanish, a witness reports seeing a smiling girl with too many teeth. The incident spanned decades, from the 1890s to as recently as 1998, when 3 children disappeared from a small town near Austin after a vintage photograph was displayed in their school's history exhibition. The cases were never solved, the children never found. Samuel documented everything, creating a detailed file that he kept in a locked cabinet in his office. He wasn't sure what he was preparing for, but somehow he knew their paths would cross again. The smiling girl had promised as much. On a rainy Tuesday in April, Margaret placed a small package on Samuel's desk. "Special delivery," she said. "No return address." Samuel stared at the brown paper wrapping, heart pounding. "Who delivered it?" "Courier service. Said it was from the Texas State Historical Society." Margaret paused, noticing his expression. "Is something wrong?" "No," Samuel lied. "Just surprised. I didn't request anything from them." After Margaret left, Samuel examined the package without touching it. It was the right size and shape to contain a photograph. The handwriting on the label was formal, professional, nothing like the childish scrawl he remembered. For hours, the package sat untouched while Samuel worked around it, casting wary glances in its direction. Finally, as the office emptied for the day, he knew he had to face whatever was inside. Using a letter opener, he carefully sliced through the wrapping to reveal a hardbound book titled Lost Towns of Texas, A Photographic History. A note from the actual Historical Society explained they'd sent the advance copy based on his recent research inquiries. Samuel exhaled shakily. Just a book, not a photograph, not her. As he flipped through the pages, however, his relief evaporated. The book contained dozens of historical photographs of now-abandoned Texas towns. Schoolhouses, church gatherings, main streets, family portraits, all the places she could hide. He scanned each image carefully, searching for her familiar face among the crowds of solemn Texans. Page after page revealed nothing unusual, just the honest faces of frontier families and townspeople long dead. Then, near the end of the book, Samuel found a section on Crier Creek. His fingers trembled as he turned to a full-page reproduction of a familiar school photograph, the very one that had started his nightmare. The caption read simply, "Oakwood Elementary School, Crier Creek, 1929. Photograph discovered in town archives." Samuel studied the image, heart racing. The children stood in their neat rows, the teacher rigid at the back. But the smiling girl was missing. Where she had once stood in the back row was simply an empty space, as if she had been carefully edited out. He flipped to the acknowledgements page, searching for the photo credits. The Crier Creek School photograph was listed as courtesy of private collection, donor anonymous. Samuel slammed the book shut and shoved it into his desk drawer. Someone knew. Someone had sent this deliberately. As he gathered his belongings to leave, his desk phone rang. The office was empty now, everyone else gone for the day. Against his better judgment, Samuel answered. "Hello?" Static crackled on the line, then a familiar voice. Not the girl's, but the old man from Crier Creek. "She's found another way in." "Who is this?" Samuel demanded, though he already knew. "You burned her photograph, but you can't burn them all. She's patient. She's found someone new to play with." The line went dead. Samuel immediately called the number back, but an automated message informed him the number was not in service. That night, Samuel couldn't sleep. The rain continued, droplets tracing paths down his bedroom window like tears. Around 3 a.m., his phone chimed with a text message. "Unknown number. Help me. She's here." A photograph accompanied the text. A dimly lit bedroom, the shadow of a small figure visible against the wall. Samuel didn't recognize the room. Another text followed. "Found your number in old Chronicle article. You know about her. The smiling girl. Please help." Samuel sat up, fully awake now. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Was this a trap? The entity trying to lure him back into her game? Or was someone else genuinely experiencing what he had? "Who are you?" he typed back. "Michael Drummond, history teacher, Killeen High School." A pause, then. Found old class photo in school archives. Girl with strange smile. Now she's here, moving in the shadows. Samuel's blood ran cold. It was happening again. Don't look directly at her teeth, he texted. Don't run. She feeds on fear. Too late, came the reply. She's taken my shadow. I see her everywhere, in every reflection. Samuel made a decision. Where are you? I'll come. Killeen, 1452 Oak Ridge Drive. Then, moments later, hurry! I can hear her laughing in the walls. Samuel dressed quickly, throwing essentials into a bag. Killeen was nearly 3 hours away, but if he left now, he could arrive before dawn. As he reached for his car keys, another text arrived. It contained only a photograph, a close-up of a man's face, eyes gouged out, blood streaming down his cheeks. Behind him, barely visible in the darkness, was the unmistakable silhouette of a small girl with an impossibly wide smile. Dawn was breaking as Samuel pulled onto Oak Ridge Drive, a quiet residential street lined with modest homes. Number 1452 was a small ranch-style house set back from the road, its yard overgrown, newspapers piled on the porch. No lights shone from within. Samuel approached cautiously, noting the empty driveway and drawn curtains. He knocked on the front door. No response. After a moment's hesitation, he tried the handle. Unlocked. The house was silent and cold, with that same oppressive feeling Samuel remembered from his apartment the night he'd confronted the smiling girl. In the living room, books and papers were scattered across the floor, as if someone had been searching frantically for information. "Mr. Drummond?" Samuel called, moving deeper into the house. No answer. In the kitchen, a laptop sat open on the table, surrounded by printed photographs and news clippings. Samuel examined them quickly. Drummond had been researching the same patterns Samuel had discovered: mysterious photographs, missing children, small Texas towns. One article was about Crier Creek, with Samuel's byline from a feature he'd written years ago on ghost towns of Texas. A notebook lay open beside the laptop, filled with increasingly erratic handwriting. The final entry, dated the previous day, read, "She's no longer confined to the photograph. I see her everywhere, in windows, in puddles, in the bathroom mirror. She's taken my shadow. My eyes burn constantly. The children in my class say I look different. Empty, they say. History repeats. I found the pattern, but not the solution. If anyone reads this, contact Samuel Wilkins at the Dallas Chronicle. He survived her once." Samuel continued to the bedroom, steeling himself for what he might find. The door stood ajar, revealing a room in disarray. Clothes strewn about, drawers pulled open, bedsheets tangled on the floor. But no Michael Drummond. No body. No blood, despite the horrific image sent to Samuel's phone. On the bedside table sat a single framed photograph, a class picture from what appeared to be Killeen High School, dated the previous fall. Students in neat rows, a male teacher standing to the side. Samuel leaned closer, examining the faces. There, in the back row, stood a familiar figure, a girl with an unnaturally wide smile, looking directly at the camera while her classmates stared ahead. A noise behind him made Samuel whirl around. Standing in the doorway was a police officer, hand resting on his holstered weapon. "Sir, this is a crime scene. I need you to step outside immediately." Samuel raised his hands. "I'm Samuel Wilkins from the Dallas Chronicle. Michael Drummond contacted me last night, said he needed help." The officer's expression hardened. "Mr. Drummond was reported missing by the school 3 days ago when he failed to show up for classes. How exactly did he contact you last night?" "By text," Samuel said, reaching slowly for his phone. "I can show you." The messages were gone. Every text from the unknown number had disappeared, including the disturbing photograph. Hours later, after police questioning and a statement that made him sound delusional at best, criminal at worst, Samuel was released with a warning not to leave town while the investigation continued. His explanation about mysterious photographs and a supernatural entity targeting Drummond had earned him skeptical looks and murmured concerns about his mental health. They'd confiscated his phone, but found no evidence of the texts he claimed to have received. No trace of Michael Drummond had been found beyond signs of a hasty departure. Some clothes missing, car gone, no signs of struggle. The class photograph Samuel had seen on the bedside table was now in police evidence, but the officer who'd catalogued it confirmed there was nothing unusual about it. Certainly no smiling girl in the back row, where Samuel insisted he'd seen her. Released, but shaken, Samuel checked into a motel on the outskirts of Killeen. He felt trapped in a nightmare that was expanding beyond his control. The entity hadn't just returned. She was evolving, growing stronger, manipulating reality itself. As night fell, Samuel sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the blank television screen. In its reflection, he could see himself and the room behind him. Nothing unusual, nothing missing, until he blinked. In that split second of darkness, the reflection changed. Now behind him stood Michael Drummond, eyes gouged out, blood streaming down his face, and beside him, holding his hand like a child might hold a parent's, was the smiling girl. Samuel spun around. The room was empty. When he turned back to the television, the reflection showed only himself again, pale and terrified. But as he watched, a small handprint appeared on the screen, pressed from the inside, as if something were trying to push through. Samuel's phone, a temporary replacement he'd purchased after the police took his, chimed with a text notification. Unknown number. Thank you for the new friend, Mr. Wilkins, but I still want you most of all. Attached was a photograph of Samuel himself, sitting on the motel bed, taken from the perspective of the television screen. In the image, the smiling girl stood directly behind him, needle teeth inches from his neck. Samuel didn't turn around. He knew now that she wanted him to look, to run, to feed her with his fear. Instead, he stared directly at the television screen as he spoke. This ends now, not just for me, but for all of them, all the children you've taken. The temperature in the room plummeted. The lights flickered. You can't stop me, came a whisper from behind him. No one ever has. Maybe not alone, Samuel agreed. But I'm not alone anymore. From his pocket, he withdrew the final page of Michael Drummond's notebook, torn out and pocketed before the police arrived. On it was a list of dates and towns, each marking an incident like the one in Crier Creek. And at the bottom, an observation. She grows stronger with each victim, but they're not gone, not completely. I can hear them sometimes crying from inside her. Samuel stood and finally turned to face her. The smiling girl stood in the center of the motel room, her form more solid than he remembered, more real. You've taken so many, Samuel said. Their shadows, their eyes, their fear, but they're still there, aren't they? Inside you, and they want out. The girl's smile faltered slightly. They're mine now, forever. Samuel looked past her to the shadows gathering in the corners of the room. They can hear me, can't they? All the children from Crier Creek, the ones from the other towns, Michael Drummond. They're listening. The shadows began to move, swirling slowly around the edges of the room. The girl's smile disappeared completely, replaced by something like concern. They can't help you, she hissed. They're mine. Are they? Samuel challenged. Or are you theirs? How many pieces of yourself have you given away to take them? How hollow are you now? The shadows coalesced, forming vague human shapes, small, child-sized figures emerging from the darkness. The girl spun around, needle teeth bared in a snarl. Back! She commanded. But the shadow children continued their approach, silent and implacable. Samuel felt a strange calm descend over him. You feed on fear, but what do you fear? The girl backed away from the advancing shadows, her form beginning to fracture again, cracks spreading across her surface. Stay away, she shrieked. They want their shadows back, Samuel said quietly. Their eyes. Everything you took, The first of the shadow children reached the girl, its dark hand touching her arm. Where they connected, light spilled through the cracks in her form. She screamed, the sound piercing and inhuman. One by one, the shadow children surrounded her, each touch bringing more light, more cracks, more screams. The girl writhed in their midst, her form disintegrating, bright light pouring from within her like she was a paper lantern being consumed by flame. "This isn't over," she screeched as her face began to collapse inward. "I'll find another way, another door." "Maybe," Samuel said for the final time, "but not through them, and not through me." With a sound like thunder, the girl imploded in a burst of blinding light. When Samuel could see again, both she and the shadow children were gone. In their place on the motel carpet lay dozens of photographs, edges charred, images showing only empty backgrounds where people should have stood. In the silence that followed, Samuel felt something fundamental shift in the air around him, a lightening, as if a great weight had been lifted. Outside, the rain had stopped. Stars were visible through breaks in the clouds. Samuel gathered the photographs carefully, knowing they needed to be destroyed properly this time. Not just burned, but the ashes scattered, the memory of them erased from the world. As he worked, he felt eyes upon him, not malevolent, but watchful, grateful. The children weren't gone, not completely, but they were free, and so was he, for now. In the bathroom mirror, Samuel's reflection was whole again, eyes intact, shadow where it should be. But he noticed something new, something that hadn't been there before. A single strand of his hair had turned stark white. He touched it gingerly, wondering what other marks this experience had left on him, visible and invisible. Wondering how many others had faced her throughout history, how many had lost, how many had merely postponed the inevitable. The entity had promised to return, to find another way back into the world, and Samuel believed her. But next time, he would be ready. Next time, he wouldn't be alone. As dawn broke over Killeen, Samuel Wilkins stepped out of the motel room carrying a metal trash can filled with ashes. The morning wind caught them as he scattered them across an empty field, carrying away the last physical traces of the smiling girl with too many teeth. But as he returned to his car, Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, in some forgotten photograph, in some dusty album or archive, a girl was beginning to smile, her teeth growing just a little sharper, a little more numerous, as she waited for someone new to notice her. And the cycle would begin again.